Let me take you back to ancient times, a time when a young boy named Joshua was born into the tribe of Ephraim, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. This child, born under the vast skies of Egypt and eventually raised in the wilderness, would one day be known as Joshua the Courageous. But before all of that, he was just a boy, innocent and eager, growing up amidst a people full of hope and struggle. Joshua's early years were marked by a sense of purpose, though he could not fully understand it yet. His family was one of many within the Israelite camp, yet from the beginning, there was something different about him. Raised during Israel's exodus from Egypt, he saw miracles at every turn. The parting of the Red Sea, manna falling from heaven, and water springing from dry rocks. Imagine what it must have been like to witness such wonders as a young child. For Joshua, these were powerful signs of a God who was real, mighty, and ever-present. As he grew older, Joshua became deeply connected with his community, working alongside his father and learning the responsibilities that came with being part of the Israelite people. Life in the wilderness was harsh. Days were filled with the heat of the desert sun, and nights were cold under a blanket of stars. Joshua learned resilience and obedience in these conditions. Through it all, he watched Moses lead, saw the elders struggle, and observed the people's deep need for guidance, for leadership. It was during this time that Joshua became close to Moses. Moses saw promise in him, noticing the boy's loyalty and his unbreakable spirit. In Joshua, Moses found a student and a friend, someone willing to listen and eager to serve. Joshua was always the first to rise and the last to rest, ready to stand by Moses through every hardship. But it wasn't just Moses who noticed something unique in Joshua. Even the people began to see his strength and quiet confidence. He became known as a young man of faith, who trusted in the same God who had delivered Israel from Egypt's grasp. Under Moses' mentorship, Joshua's faith only grew stronger, and his trust in God became his most defining trait. Joshua's childhood and youth were a time of preparation, a silent forging in the fires of the wilderness. Little did anyone know, the boy who walked humbly beside Moses, learning and observing, would one day be called to lead the entire nation of Israel. As Joshua entered adulthood, his journey alongside Moses became even more intense. Now he was not just learning. He was on the front lines, a trusted warrior and a humble servant. When Amalek attacked Israel soon after their escape from Egypt, it was Joshua who led the Israelite army into battle. While Moses stood on the hill, staff in hand, Joshua fought with all his strength below. Whenever Moses' arms grew tired, Israel began to falter. But when his arms were raised, they surged forward. Joshua felt it too, sensing the connection between God's power and their victory. Through this, he learned a crucial lesson. True strength came from the Lord. Joshua's devotion to Moses grew with each battle, each challenge, and each miracle they witnessed together. He became Moses' shadow, his confidant, and his most loyal supporter. He learned to trust Moses not only as a leader but as a vessel of divine wisdom. In Joshua's eyes, Moses was more than just a man. He was the embodiment of God's guidance and protection, and with this reverence came Joshua's deep humility. While others sought their own power or questioned Moses' decisions, Joshua quietly submitted, recognizing that his place was to serve and to learn. One of the most significant moments came when God called Moses up Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments. The people below grew anxious and impatient, and they would eventually turn to idols, forgetting the God who had brought them out of Egypt. But Joshua was different. He waited faithfully at the foot of the mountain, guarding the way, refusing to leave his post. For 40 days and nights, he waited, alone and uncertain, yet unwavering. It was a time of solitude, of faith in the unseen, and of trust that Moses would return with the word of God. When he finally did, Joshua's heart swelled with awe and joy. He was more certain than ever that his purpose was tied to Moses and to the God they both served. Through every trial, Joshua's spirit was being forged. He was learning patience, endurance, and above all, the strength that comes from obedience. Then, the day came that no one was truly prepared for, Moses' final breath. Joshua had spent decades by his side, learning, following, and believing Moses would lead Israel all the way to the Promised Land. But now the great leader was gone. The people mourned deeply, feeling the weight of loss and uncertainty. Who could possibly take Moses' place? In the quiet of his heart, Joshua felt the stirring of God's voice, calling him to step forward. It was a calling that weighed heavily on him, for he had never imagined himself capable of filling Moses' sandals. But God, in his wisdom, knew that Joshua was ready. He spoke directly to Joshua, telling him, "Be strong and courageous, for you shall lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors." These words echoed in Joshua's mind, filling him with strength he didn't know he possessed. Yet, even with this divine reassurance, there was a trembling in Joshua's spirit. He was about to lead a generation that had only known life in the wilderness, a people who had been shaped by waiting and wandering. The Promised Land was no longer a distant hope. It was now their destiny, and he was the one called to guide them there. God spoke again, saying, "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you." This promise lit a fire in Joshua's heart. It was the same God who had parted the Red Sea, who had led them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. That same God would be with him, just as he had been with Moses. And with that assurance, Joshua took on the mantle of leadership with a fierce resolve. For the first time, Joshua spoke to the people as their leader, urging them to prepare, to consecrate themselves, for in 3 days they would cross the Jordan and enter the land that had been promised to their ancestors. It was a moment of transformation, not just for Joshua but for all of Israel. He wasn't merely filling Moses' role. He was stepping into his own, a leader chosen by God himself. And from that moment, Joshua was no longer the apprentice or the faithful follower. He was the one to lead them forward into God's promise. As the third day dawned, a hush fell over the Israelite camp as they gathered near the banks of the Jordan River. The waters were high, swift, and relentless, and there was no clear way to cross. But Joshua's command had been simple and confident. "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." The people's hearts beat with anticipation, trusting that somehow God would make a way. Joshua called for the priests, instructing them to carry the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest that held the tablets of the law, and lead the people to the river's edge. The Ark symbolized God's presence, his promises, and his power. As they approached, a silence blanketed the crowd, and all eyes were fixed on the Ark as it moved forward, leading the way. With the priests holding the Ark high, their feet touched the edge of the water. And in that very moment, the impossible happened. The rushing waters of the Jordan began to stop, piling up in a great heap far upstream. Before the people's eyes, the riverbed appeared, dry ground, stretching from one side to the other. Awe-stricken, the people watched as the priests stood firm in the middle of the river, holding the Ark as a signal that God's presence was with them, making a way where there had been none. One by one, the Israelites began to cross, feeling solid earth beneath their feet as they passed through what had once been a powerful river. Parents held their children close, elders leaned on their staffs, and families looked at one another in amazement, realizing they were witnessing a miracle that generations would speak of for centuries. This was their Jordan, their Red Sea moment, confirming that just as God had been with Moses, he was now with Joshua. As the last of the people crossed, Joshua commanded 12 men, one from each tribe, to gather a stone from the middle of the Jordan and carry it to the other side. These stones would stand as a lasting memorial, a reminder of the day God held back the waters and led his people on dry ground. When future generations asked about those stones, the Israelites would say, "This is where the Lord showed his power, where he brought us into the land he had promised." And as the priests carrying the ark stepped out onto the riverbank, the waters rushed back, flowing as they had before, wild and untamed. But Israel was now on the other side. They had crossed over, not just a river, but a threshold into a new chapter of their history. Joshua stood among them, fully stepping into his role as leader, with the confidence that the God who parted the Jordan would lead them through whatever challenges lay ahead. With the Jordan behind them, the Israelites now faced their first great challenge in the Promised Land, the fortified city of Jericho. Towering walls surrounded it, seeming to reach the sky, and the gates were tightly shut, prepared for any attack. To the people, Jericho must have seemed impenetrable, an impossible first test. But Joshua knew that they weren't relying on human strength or strategy. They were following God's lead, even if that meant doing things in ways that defied human logic. One night, as Joshua approached the city, deep in thought, he looked up and saw a man standing before him with a drawn sword in hand. Startled, Joshua approached and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The figure replied, "Neither, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Realizing that he was in the presence of a divine messenger, Joshua fell to the ground in reverence. This was a powerful reminder that this battle, like all the ones to come, would be fought by God himself. Joshua was merely his instrument. The instructions that followed were unusual, to say the least. They were to march around Jericho once a day for 6 days. No swords, no battering rams. Just the priests carrying the ark and the people following in silence. And on the 7th day, they would circle the city 7 times. At the final lap, the priests would blow their trumpets, and the people would give a mighty shout. It was a strange strategy, one that seemed almost foolish, but Joshua relayed the plan without hesitation, and the people prepared to follow. And so it began. Each day, the Israelites rose, assembled in silence, and walked around the city. Inside Jericho, the residents watched from the walls, puzzled and unnerved. Day after day, the Israelites marched, and day after day, they said nothing, simply walking with the ark at the center. The silence became a kind of power on its own, a testament to their obedience and unwavering faith in God's command. Then came the 7th day. The people gathered early, and this time they marched around the city not once, but 7 times. With each lap, anticipation grew, a quiet tension building in the air. As they completed the 7th circle, the priests raised their trumpets and blew a powerful blast. The sound echoed across the land, and then, in unison, the people shouted with all their might. In that instant, the ground trembled. Before their eyes, the walls of Jericho began to crumble, stones falling upon stones. The mighty walls reduced to rubble in a matter of moments. What had seemed indestructible now lay open before them. The city of Jericho laid bare. The Israelites surged forward, overtaking the city as God had commanded. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that this victory belonged to the Lord. Jericho wasn't just a battle won. It was a divine act that sent a clear message to Israel and to all of Canaan. God was with his people, and his power would go before them. And Joshua, having led them in unwavering faith, had proven that he, too, was chosen to fulfill God's promises in this new land. The victory at Jericho filled Israel with confidence and hope. But as the dust settled, their next objective became clear. Ai, a smaller, less fortified city that seemed to pale in comparison to Jericho. This time, Joshua's scouts reported that the city would be easy to take, requiring only a fraction of Israel's forces. Confidently, Joshua sent a small band of warriors to conquer Ai. Yet what followed shocked the entire camp. The men of Ai struck back fiercely, defeating the Israelites and driving them away. 36 Israelite warriors fell, and the rest fled, stunned and ashamed. For the first time, Israel had tasted defeat in the Promised Land. Joshua, overwhelmed with grief and confusion, tore his clothes, fell face down before the ark, and cried out, "Lord, why has this happened? Why did you bring us here, only to let us be defeated?" Then God revealed the source of their failure. There was sin in the camp. An Israelite had violated the sacred covenant by taking some of the spoils from Jericho that had been declared off-limits, items meant to be devoted entirely to the Lord. This sin, though hidden from human eyes, had disrupted their unity and defiled their obedience. God instructed Joshua to search out the guilty party and remove the offense from among them. Following God's direction, Joshua gathered the people tribe by tribe, clan by clan, and finally family by family until the guilty man, Achan, was brought forward. Achan confessed, admitting he had taken a beautiful robe, silver, and gold, hiding them in the ground beneath his tent. This single act of disobedience had brought defeat and dishonor upon Israel. With a heavy heart, Joshua carried out the Lord's judgment, purging the sin from their midst to restore the people's purity and unity. With the covenant restored, Joshua prepared his men once more to face Ai, this time with God's guidance. The plan was different. They would set an ambush. Joshua led a group to camp near the city, while a hidden force waited in the hills behind Ai. At dawn, Joshua and his men approached the gates, luring the warriors of Ai out of the city and into the open fields. The men of Ai, seeing Israel retreat as before, felt emboldened and pursued them, leaving the city unguarded. In that moment, Joshua signaled to the ambush, and the hidden Israelite forces rushed into Ai, setting it ablaze. As the smoke rose, the men of Ai realized they had been outmaneuvered. Surrounded on all sides, they fell to Israel's strength and strategy. Ai was captured, and this time Israel emerged victorious. This victory was more than a strategic win. It was a reaffirmation of their covenant with God. Joshua led the people to Mount Ebal, where he built an altar of uncut stones. In the presence of all Israel, he read aloud the entire book of the law, reminding them of their commitment to the Lord. Stone by stone, he engraved the words on the altar, sealing their renewed covenant. Here, at Mount Ebal, Israel stood united once more, bound by the law and strengthened by the realization that victory depended not on numbers or strength, but on their faithfulness to God alone. With the covenant freshly renewed at Mount Ebal, Israel's path forward seemed clearer than ever. But soon, word of their miraculous victories at Jericho and Ai spread quickly through the land, stirring both fear and defiance among the surrounding nations. Many kings prepared for battle, forming alliances to defend their cities against the unstoppable Israelites. Yet one group, the Gibeonites, chose a different path. The Gibeonites, fearing for their survival, devised a clever deception. They dressed themselves in tattered clothes, with worn-out sandals and moldy provisions, as if they had traveled from a distant land. Arriving at Joshua's camp, they pleaded for a treaty, saying they were from a far-off place and had heard of Israel's great God. They spoke with reverence and humility, presenting their bread, cracked and dry, as proof of a long journey. Joshua and the Israelite leaders looked at the Gibeonites and, seeing no reason to doubt their story, agreed to make a covenant with them. They promised protection and peace, swearing by the name of the Lord. However, Joshua had made one critical mistake. He had not sought the counsel of God. Just days later, Israel discovered the truth. The Gibeonites were not from a distant land at all, but were actually close neighbors, living within Canaan's borders. The leaders of Israel were outraged, feeling deceived and humiliated. Many called for punishment, demanding justice for the trickery. But a covenant had been made, and Joshua knew he could not break an oath taken before the Lord. Honoring his word, he spared the Gibeonites, placing them in service to Israel as woodcutters and water carriers for the altar of God. Though they had deceived Israel, the Gibeonites were now bound to serve the Lord, finding protection under Israel's wing. But this peace treaty stirred anger among the other Canaanite kings. 5 Amorite kings, fearing that Israel's influence was spreading too close to their lands, gathered a massive army to strike Gibeon in retaliation. The Gibeonites, knowing they could not survive this onslaught, sent word to Joshua, "Do not abandon your servants. Come quickly and save us." Without hesitation, Joshua and his warriors marched through the night, covering miles to reach Gibeon by dawn. As they arrived, God spoke to Joshua, assuring him, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will withstand you." With this promise, Joshua and his army surged into battle with fearless determination, driving back the Amorite forces. As the enemy began to retreat, God intervened mightily on Israel's behalf, sending a hailstorm upon the Amorites. The stones fell from the sky, striking down more of the enemy than the swords of Israel had. Yet even with this miraculous help, the day was fading, and the battle was not yet won. Joshua, filled with unshakable faith, looked up to the heavens and cried out, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon." and the sun obeyed. Time itself seemed to pause, with the sun holding its place in the sky, allowing Joshua and his warriors to complete the victory. Israel triumphed over their enemies that day, a victory marked by a supernatural display of God's power in answer to Joshua's bold faith. The story of the battle against the Amorite kings and the miraculous halting of the sun spread far and wide, striking fear and awe into the hearts of all who heard it. Joshua's leadership was now unquestionable, his faith evident to all of Israel. And for Joshua himself, this victory was a profound reminder. With God, even the natural order of the world could be bent, for there was no limit to what faith and obedience could accomplish. Fresh from the victory over the Amorite kings, Joshua's confidence and the people's resolve reached new heights. Yet their mission was far from complete. The land was still scattered with fortified cities and powerful armies, strongholds of resistance against Israel's claim to the Promised Land. But the God who had halted the sun continued to fight for them, and Joshua pressed forward, leading Israel into the heart of Canaan. First, he turned his attention southward, where a coalition of kings and warriors from the southern cities had banded together, hoping their numbers would protect them. But Joshua moved swiftly, striking one city after another in rapid succession. No fortress could stand before the Israelites, and no army was strong enough to break the strength of the people led by God himself. The cities of Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir all fell in turn, their gates breached and their armies scattered. In each place, Joshua made sure to dedicate the victory to the Lord, following the commands given to Moses, purging the land of its idols and securing each city for the people of Israel. As they moved from victory to victory, the fear that began with Jericho and Ai spread like wildfire across the land. In the north, another powerful alliance was forming, led by Jabin, king of Hazor, a formidable city known for its strength and wealth. Hearing of Israel's victories, Jabin gathered a massive army that far outnumbered anything Israel had faced before. Warriors poured in from the surrounding kingdoms, all converging near the waters of Merom, determined to end Israel's conquest once and for all. The alliance was so vast that their chariots and soldiers covered the plains, their horses stamping and chariots gleaming under the sun, a sight meant to intimidate any who dared approach. But Joshua was undeterred. God spoke to him, saying, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give them all over to Israel slain." With this promise, Joshua rallied his men and led a surprise attack, catching the Northern Alliance off guard. God's hand was with Israel, and a fierce battle ensued. Though the enemy was mighty, they were soon overwhelmed, their chariots scattered, and their ranks broken. True to God's command, Joshua hamstrung the horses and burned the chariots, a declaration that Israel's trust was not in horses or chariots but in the strength of God alone. He continued his campaign north, eventually reaching Hazor itself. The city fell, its defenses crushed, and its once proud walls left in ruins. With the fall of Hazor, the last great stronghold of resistance was broken. Joshua's campaigns across the north and south marked the decisive turning point. The land had been subdued, and Israel's enemies were vanquished. With each battle, Joshua had not only gained land but had woven together a new sense of unity among the tribes. The land of Canaan was no longer a place of fear or foreign power but was gradually transforming into a homeland, a land where the promises given to Abraham were finally coming to life. Now, after years of relentless battles and hard-won victories, Joshua could begin the task of settling the land, knowing that every city taken, every victory won, had been by God's hand. The journey was long and the cost had been high, but the people of Israel now stood poised to claim what had been promised. Their journey of faith rewarded by the reality of a home, a land they could now call their own. With the land subdued and the cities of Canaan under Israel's control, Joshua's focus shifted from conquest to a different but equally critical task: the division of the land among the 12 tribes of Israel. This was more than a simple distribution of territory. It was a fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Each portion of land represented a legacy, a permanent inheritance for every tribe and family within the nation. Joshua knew this was not just about settling disputes or drawing borders. It was about shaping Israel's future, establishing roots for generations to come. The leaders of each tribe gathered around Joshua, awaiting their inheritance with anticipation. The great cities and fertile valleys were before them, each region a testament to God's faithfulness. To ensure that the distribution was fair and guided by God, Joshua relied on the sacred practice of casting lots, trusting that each portion was divinely chosen. Tribe by tribe, territory was assigned, from the vast mountains to the rich coastal plains, each place uniquely suited to its people. The tribe of Judah received a large and rugged expanse in the south, filled with both wilderness and fruitful valleys. It was a land of strength, suited to a tribe from which, one day, kings would arise. Ephraim and the half-tribe of Manasseh were given fertile regions in the heartland, rich with streams and fields. The other tribes received their portions, each finding their place, their heritage, and their future in the land. For each family and clan, this land was now their own, an enduring gift from God that no enemy could take away. Yet, there were special allotments that held unique significance. Caleb, Joshua's old friend and fellow spy from the days of Moses, approached him, reminding him of the promise Moses had made to him decades ago. Caleb, now an old man but still filled with courage, requested the hill country of Hebron, the very land where the Anakim, the giants of Canaan, had once dwelled. Joshua granted Caleb's request with joy, and Caleb, though advanced in age, led his family into Hebron, driving out the giants as he had vowed to do so many years before. Caleb's strength and faith remained a powerful reminder to all Israel of God's faithfulness across generations. Joshua also set aside cities of refuge throughout the land, places where those accused of accidental crimes could find sanctuary and justice. These cities represented mercy, a place where the vulnerable could seek safety under God's laws. Additionally, the Levites, the tribe dedicated to serving in the temple, were granted cities rather than lands. Scattered among all the tribes, the Levites would serve as spiritual leaders, reminding each tribe of their covenant relationship with God. As each tribe took their place, Joshua knew that Israel was now united not only by a common history but by the land itself. The boundaries drawn on this day would serve as a foundation for Israel's identity, a map of God's promises fulfilled. Families would farm these lands, raise their children, and worship the God who had brought them from slavery to a home of their own. At last, with the division complete and the tribes settled, Joshua's mission was nearly fulfilled. Israel was no longer a wandering people. They were a nation, rooted in a land of their own. As he watched the people setting up their homes and establishing their lives, Joshua saw in their faces the realization that they were no longer strangers or sojourners. They were living in the land of promise, a gift passed down from the faith of their ancestors and sealed by their own courage and faithfulness. As the years passed and the tribes of Israel began to thrive in their new inheritance, Joshua grew older, his hair graying, his face lined with the marks of battles fought and journeys endured. He had seen the impossible. Slavery turned to freedom, wilderness turned to promise, a people forged into a nation under God's covenant. Now, in the twilight of his life, he sensed it was time to gather the tribes one last time, to speak to them from his heart and remind them of all they had been given. The leaders and elders of Israel gathered at Shechem, a place rich with history. This was the land where God had first promised Abraham a home for his descendants. It was here that Jacob had buried foreign idols and committed his family to the worship of the one true God. Now, before the leaders of the 12 tribes, Joshua spoke with the wisdom and authority of a leader who had walked alongside God. He recounted the journey from Egypt to Canaan, reminding them of the God who had split seas, toppled walls, and brought down giants. He spoke of the covenant, the sacred relationship that bound them to God, a relationship built on faith, obedience, and love. In every victory, in every miracle, it was the Lord's hand that had guided them, Joshua reminded them. Not their own strength, not their numbers, but the power and promise of the God who had called them his people. But there was a warning woven into Joshua's words. He had seen how easily Israel's heart could stray, how quickly they could turn to idols and abandon the covenant. With urgency, he spoke to them, saying, "Now, fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates and in Egypt, and serve the Lord, Joshua knew that if Israel were to thrive, they would need to remain faithful to the God who had brought them this far. Then, with a firm and unshakable conviction, he declared, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." His words echoed over the assembly, a call to loyalty and commitment, a choice each person would have to make. The people, stirred by Joshua's passion, responded with a resounding commitment. "We will serve the Lord our God and obey him." They knew that without him, their victories and their land meant nothing. Joshua then took a large stone and set it up beneath the oak tree near the holy place of the Lord, saying, "This stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness if you are untrue to your God." This stone was more than a monument. It was a testament, a silent witness to the vow Israel had made. Joshua's last act was not as a warrior but as a shepherd, guiding his people one final time to cling to the God who loved them. Shortly afterward, Joshua passed away, full of years and honor, his mission complete. Israel mourned the passing of their leader, knowing they had been led by a man of unshakable faith and courage, a man who had walked in the footsteps of Moses and had carried them into the very heart of God's promises. And so, with Joshua's passing, Israel stood as a people with both a history and a homeland, bound by the covenant and strengthened by the legacy of their leaders. The memory of Joshua's words lingered among them, a reminder that in every generation, the choice to serve the Lord must be renewed. His legacy lived on, not only in the land but in the hearts of the people he had led, a legacy of faithfulness, courage, and devotion to the God who had brought them home.